Our next speaker is going to be joining us virtually. We have Nina Errey, who will be sharing more into the deep dive on work around research and research on narrative visualization. And so I'm really excited to be able to welcome her to our virtual stage. Welcome.
Hi, so my name is Nina Errey, and I'm from the University of Technology in Sydney. And my colleagues and I recently carried out a study where we investigated narrative visualization evaluation in practice. It was titled Evaluating Narrative Visualization, a Survey of Practitioners. So today I'm going to talk about background, evaluation, heuristics, and then implementation. But before I get started, I want to say that we recruited our participants from the Data Visualization Society. The Data Visualization Society played a fundamental role in the facilitation of this research, and we would really like to acknowledge that. So back to the study. We recruited practitioners like all of you out there because we believe that you have a wealth of knowledge that the academic community cannot begin to fully address. This knowledge is learned through years of lived experience, resulting in tacit knowledge. Or, in other words, practitioners know what works. We believe that if practitioners and academic research align, they can answer some of the biggest questions in visualization. Today, we are looking at the question of how to evaluate narrative visualization. Narrative visualization may be interchangeable with data storytelling. We know it's used to convey important, complex information, like on topics like COVID-19. So in this study, we wanted to find out, how do practitioners of narrative visualization evaluate their important work? How do you know your data stories are understood? So to find out, we asked them. We had two guiding research questions. One, how is narrative visualization evaluated? And two, what is it evaluated for? We designed a survey that was based on these two questions, and then thanks to the Data Visualization Society, we were able to recruit 63 practitioners to fill out our survey, and then delve further into our survey results. We recruited another 12 practitioners to be interviewed. And we asked them firstly some background questions. We asked them, what domain do practitioners usually work in? And we expected most would work in journalism. Indeed, 21% or 13 did work in journalism, and then a further 17% or 11 worked in education. However, by far, the most common domain was the other domain, which accounted for 57% of 36 participants. And it became clear that narrative visualization is employed in many varied domains. These other domains range from city planning, gender politics, and my personal favorite, retail for tires. It seemed the responses to our first question were pretty unexpected. So next, let's look at evaluation. So there's two methods of evaluation: inspection methods, which someone, maybe an expert, inspects your visualization, or end user testing methods, which includes real users. So we asked, do practitioners have an external expert or colleague and inspect their work? Unsurprisingly, 90% of practitioners have someone inspect their work. This was, however, carried out not in a formal, systematic way. It was more informal methods, where the most popular method was group discussion. In our interviews, we asked, why is group discussion such a popular method of evaluation? And it became clear that it was because practitioners rely on the expertise and the experience of their team to find out what works. Asking your team to check your work might be obvious, But this is an important finding because to those that don't work in the field, it means that there sets the fundamentals for a community of practice where the learning from your team can be shared in a community that can extend far beyond your team. And we'll talk about this later in the presentation. So next I'll look at end user testing methods. Did practitioners include end users in their narrative visualization evaluation? Academic research has repeatedly made clear that end users should be included in all phases of development. Approximately half of practitioners did not include end users. While this is not surprising, this showed that despite the undeniable importance of including end users, it's just not happening in practice. And we asked practitioners why, and they explained there's simply no time, particularly if they're working in journalism where there's a short news cycle. Those that did include end user testing, 18 used the walkthrough think aloud. Others used informal interviews or focus groups. But once again, the most interesting answers were the other answers, where novel evaluation methods were used. To get a realistic and spontaneous outcome, guerrilla end user testing was experimented with. This form of end user testing means randomly approaching members in the public that have no context with the project. Here, the practitioner described watching closely while users interacted with the project and asking them, why did you stop there? Or why did you click there? Guerrilla end user testing is at odds with laboratory testing. It is a unique and direct spontaneous approach and definitely deserves greater investigation. So now we are moving on from how practitioners evaluate to actually what are they evaluating for. So what we did is we analyzed academic literature, looking for empirical studies with clear recommendations for the design of narrative visualization and put together a list. Then we asked practitioners about this list. It was clear we were missing an item, which I'll get to later, but it was also clear that some items on the list were not really relevant to evaluating narrative visualization. For example, one study that surveyed online news readers found the greatest barrier to success was just finding narrative visualization. While this is important for news outlets, practitioners working in other domains didn't really see this as a factor for success. The reason is often it could be for a small audience, especially in a business context. So it's not really important if it can be found online or not. So altogether, in the end, we ended up with 11 items on this list, which I'll go over now from most popular to least popular and give a little bit of detail about each one. So first item on the list that garnered more responses than any other was actually logical layout. This one had 33 responses and we wanted to know why. Originally, this referred to the arrangement and organization of graphical and textual elements in a design to avoid a visually jarring user experience. Practitioners describe the importance of creating a layout that flowed, where yes, visually jarring aspects were considered, but mostly they wanted the reader to not be distracted and not lost due to functionality. The next item on the list that received 29 responses was to retain reader interest. This one was quite similar to the last. However, what was emphasized here was the importance of first gaining their interest. They needed the reader to know they would get something out of it, where they want to capture the attention of their reader immediately. The conversation with practitioners on retaining reader interest often, unsurprisingly, turned to scrolly telling. And a scrolly often used in news articles was warned it could be overly structured. So where scrolly telling could often become too long and therefore lose the interest of the reader. The third item on the list was data source. identified, which, to be honest, there's little to say. I mean, generally it was a non-negotiable item, and if possible, practitioners were advised to add the method that they used to manipulate the data. However, just adding the data source was very much expected. Then next up, we had easily recognizable content. What does this mean? This means a universal understanding where it is important to use real world conventions. Not only does a reader understand content more easily, an academic study into what makes a visualization memorable found that using real world conventions makes a visualization more memorable. As described by one of the practitioners, regardless if the reader is in Australia or in Greece, it is important they recognize the symbol so it is a universal story. Another item on the list that needs greater explanation and received 18 responses was cohesiveness. This was defined as maintaining context from one data point to the next to create a coherent story. To quote one practitioner who said, every data point, every piece of information put in there should be related to the issue or problem you're talking about. A common topic in our conversations was that early in the career of multiple practitioners, cohesiveness was a difficult problem to tackle, where the problem was scope and they couldn't help but want to visualize all the data. Eventually, without a cohesive story, the work becomes unmanageable. Next up, with 13 responses, stems actually from a study that was carried out in rural Pennsylvania. And it showed that data visualization interpretation is incredibly personal. This finding was echoed by practitioners who recognize the importance of relating to the mental frames of reference of the reader. One practitioner explained how in a work about air pollution, they found that someone had calculated the data into amount of cigarettes smoked. By using something like cigarette smoke rather than abstract air pollution metrics, it's made it much easier for the reader to relate. Undeniably, all practitioners recognize the importance of color in their visualization. The difference with narrative visualization is color usage, to that of data visualization. Narrative visualization needs to evaluate story connotations and cultural considerations. One practitioner described how using a default color palette in a common data visualization program when designing a narrative visualization on a taboo subject could have led to reinforced negative color associations. Next up, we'll talk about information density. Practitioners did not shy away from information dense topics. Rather, this is one of the key benefits of narrative visualization, which can convey complex but important information. The advice for practitioners was to guide the reader into complexity, where it was advised not to open with a complex chart. Instead, introduce the topic, hold the hand of the reader so they are prepared for the complex chart at the end of the narrative visualization. Nearly there. This is the second last one. So, and this one received a measly 8 responses. So we found this surprising, as interactivity is emphasized in research as a means to encourage data retention and retrieval. Practitioners were generally not too concerned about interactivity. On 2 occasions, interactivity was described as bells and whistles, where it was important that the narrative visualization could be comprehended without the necessity to interact with it. It was advised that interactivity should be a decision left up to the reader, where if they wanted to, the reader could interact with the data to find out more. Finally, textual integration. Outside of being important for accessibility and usability, text in a narrative visualization is used for intrigue, specifically in the title of a narrative visualization, which should be descriptive and most importantly, entice the reader to read more. It was advised that the title needed to be so clear that the reader could just read the title and walk away knowing what the visualization was about without even looking at it. In one empirical experiment of visualization, it saw that the title of a visualization was crucial to the understanding of the rest of the visualization. Finally, it became clear that there was one we missed, and it wasn't really in the literature but repeatedly mentioned by practitioners. And this was the issue of data accuracy and honesty, very specific to narrative visualization. Unlike other forms of data visualization, sometimes it's better to not show the data accurately. This could even lead to misinterpretation. Instead, the data should be visualized honestly, where a really great example came from one practitioner about an often misunderstood COVID-19 case chart. This chart had all the country's case numbers in a single screen represented in log scale. Between countries, the disparity in numbers is tremendous. And this was pointed out to easily lead to misunderstanding. And here we are at the end of the list. We compiled all the survey responses and detailed advice from practitioners and put it together into a finalized list, which we call heuristics. And thanks to further advice from practitioners, we put them into overarching categories. These were composition, reader experience, and credibility and trust. Our result ended up being something like a framework. We called it a heuristic framework. Heuristics are usually associated with usability testing. However, recently they have become more and more popular kind of guidelines for domain-specific areas, where in this case, we use it for narrative visualization. But to be honest, it has been found that in another data visualization study, that heuristics is not a really well-recognized term in visualization practice, but maybe it could take hold. Maybe, we hope so anyway. So now we have our heuristics. How do we use them? Well, all considering, expecting practitioners to do what is first described as heuristic evaluation, where normally a series of external evaluators come in, inspect the work, judge it, rate the severity problems, is unlikely. Instead, the framework could be implemented informally, where it would be used as a sort of checklist that the practitioner could go over, perhaps in a group or individually. And so this is what we're testing now. And we'll get back to you. I would like to conclude this talk by coming back to a point I made before about a community of practice. We found that practitioners relied on their team for evaluation because they had years of experience. A community of practice serves a similar purpose, where the years of learning and experience can be shared so that mistakes are not repeated and that narrative visualization design could be improved. This study is a step towards solidifying a community of practice where we can align the academic research and practice. We would like to really thank all the practitioners that took part and shared their precious knowledge. We would really like to thank the Data Visualization Society for giving us the means to connect with these talented practitioners. Thank you, Outlier, for inviting us, and thank you all for listening. I look forward to hearing from you about how you evaluate your work or your thoughts on the heuristics. Do you want to add something? How would you use it? Thank you all. Obrigado. Obrigado.
My name is Aida, and I have a question about one of the points that was something like telling a global story. So what is a global story that works for everyone? There is such a thing, and isn't it a bit dangerous to think that we can tell a story that works across countries and across disciplines? Yeah, that's my question. So what is actually a global story? It's not we are using like some standards and applying them to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Nina?
Thank you. Yes, so rather than global story, I kind of we were referring to conventions, like say for a clock face, for example, or just metaphors that refer to real world conventions that you can relate to in the real world, and certain things, certain icons are universal. Well, generally universal, especially like icons or clocks, or it's true though. There are certain icons that are just, and that's definitely something to think about. How is this unique to this place and time, or can we use it universally? So it is definitely a consideration.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, down front. Do we have another mic floating around? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara. I'm a PhD student, and I would like to ask you about when you talk about textual integration and information density. Do you consider this evaluation with more micro annotation elements, like, because you talk about title, but did you consider other elements like footnotes, labels, or I don't know, maybe if you relate these textual apparatuses with color and interactivity?
Hello, PhD students. Great to hear from you. Yes, great question about textual integration. And yes, the number one use of text in a visualization, narrative visualization is, yes, usability. But and this is another really important point, that usability heuristics are separate to what these heuristics, what these guidelines are about. These guidelines are about the specific storytelling aspects of narrative visualization, and they're about, and that's why we really focus on textual integration in regard to a title, in regard to how it can push the story forward, rather than just, and obviously, of course, footnotes, annotations, anything that does not distract the reader from the story is vital. Yes.
Great, thank you. And down here in front with from online?
Yeah, we have some questions from the audience. This one is from Nicola Batteman, and they said, how would you relate data density to cohesiveness? In my research, I considered them as part of the whole, but I may revisit this idea now.
Another researcher. Oh, very fair. This is great. This is, yeah. So that was exactly the point. There's a study where it says that information dense visualizations are difficult to read, especially for people that have low data literacy. But if you can guide the researcher into a dense information, then if you kind of and you tell a cohesive story that it all relates together and it slowly builds up, just like telling a story, then you don't have to shy away from doing an overly dense piece of work. You just have to frame it and hold the hand of the reader. Hopefully that makes sense, fellow researcher.
And so let's take one more question from online, and then we're going, or in person if we have any. Yes. Here in the center, we'll do this one more in person, one more online, and then there's one more online? Okay. One more in person, and then we'll be ready for transitioning to our next speaker.
Hi, I used to be a global data practitioner in my former capacity, and I had to think really hard, well, we and in the team, about the neutrality of colors to not trigger emotions, because it's really hard like someone said, at the global thinking. Are we kind of giving up on this and bringing back the feeling of the data visualizations with little dots or stripes or something like that, or do you think there is still hope to think of a color palette globally? Sorry if this is too detailed question, but yeah.
That was a great question. So you say almost to just avoid color altogether, because it's really interesting how there is a study about how color can affect emotion, and certain colors like red and black are disturbing, and so it's less about avoiding them and more just considering how it affects the reader, using this as a consideration. And obviously you're a very experienced practitioner. This is more a set of guidelines to those starting out, and just to remember as you're walking through, this is what we should remember, this is what we should remember. And yeah, I think definitely sometimes color should not be avoided. The cultural or the emotional connotations might actually be what you want to portray. So that was a great question. Thank you.
Excellent. And a round of applause for Nina. Thank you so much for being here.
First time.